All right, let's start talking about the first chapter here, and feel free to keep the questions coming if you like. So, DNS is essential. You can't get anything done without it practically. Almost nobody refers to anything by direct IP address. You use an alphabetic domain name like ccsf.edu, and you can't send or receive any traffic from a name like that. You have to turn it into an IP address, so that's what DNS does. And so we'll talk about these topics. DNS can be attacked itself. It can assist attacks. It can be used to detect people when people are attacking you, and we'll talk about the intrinsic limitations of DNS. It has some privacy risks involved with it, pretty serious ones. So DNS under attack is the part where I was mentioning earlier where I said we really aren't going to do much of this in hands-on anymore because DNS only had one really serious vulnerability that wasn't patched for a while, and that's so old you'd have to run server 2008 to see it vulnerable, and that's so old and it's not worth doing in hands-on projects anymore. But however, in 2001, Microsoft's DNS servers were attacked, and it knocked them out for a while. And that's getting to be a while ago. Back then, people's idea of network design was pretty primitive, and Microsoft had all their traffic went through a single switch, and a large portion of companies had a centralized DNS architecture at that time, where they'd have one essential server. And if you're going to be like that, then you can take you down. People can take you down by attacking that one server. So people moved to more resilient, fault-tolerant networks that have alternate systems. Now here's another one. People moved to distributed architecture, but the attackers moved to distributed architecture. They started taking over many machines and using them as a botnet army to make distributed denial of service attacks. And in 2004, that again blocked out a large part of the web. So the bad guys get tougher too. Now in 2002, they tried to take out the DNS root servers, which we're going to talk about. The DNS root servers are at the heart of the entire internet. If someone was able to take them down and hold them down for a long period of time, like days or weeks, that really would make the web grind to a halt. That has never happened. There are 13 root servers, and each one of them is actually a distributed cluster of servers, and people flooded it with almost a gigabit per second, which was a lot at the time, and they were able to attack them, but they were not able to take them down. The root DNS servers are vastly over-provisioned, which I mean they have far more servers than they need for the ordinary amount of traffic, so they can handle a burst of a really large amount of traffic, and the attack was pretty short. An attack that only goes for 1 hour, even if it were to take down all the DNS root servers, it would have very little effect, as we'll see, because the records are cached at lower levels, so most people would still be able to find the information they need to surf the web. In 2007, somebody in Asia attacked 6 of the root servers out of the 13 with a gigabit per server, but only 2 of them were affected. The others had Anycast figured. If you've taken Cisco or perhaps NetPlus these days had it, there's 4 kinds of traffic in IP. There's unicast, one-to-one. There's multicast, one to a specific group of machines. There is broadcast, which is one machine sending to every machine it can reach. And there is Anycast, where you configure several servers at different locations with the same IP address, and when you send a packet, it will be routed by Border Gateway Protocol to whichever one of them is up. And if one of them goes down, your packet will just take a longer route to a different server with the same name. So until you can take them all down, they're not going down. It's a simple way to form effectively a server cluster of machines that can replace each other and geographically distributed around the world. That's Anycast, and the root servers all have Anycast now. And another thing that has Anycast is Cloudflare, which is what protects my website. For free, you can protect your website with Cloudflare, and then all your web servers are hidden behind a vast global network of powerful servers, so it's nearly impossible to bring down your website anymore because it's protected with a big powerful server in front of it. So here's a diagram of the 2007 attack. Just a lot of traffic here causing some errors in some of the servers, but it didn't bring them all down. So let's talk about this hierarchical structure of DNS. You got the root of the system, and the root servers only have records that tell you where the top-level domains are, like .com, .net, and .edu. Then the top-level domain servers have the servers that handle each domain. Each domain has a master server, an authoritative server. So City College has an authoritative server of some kind, and that will then you go to a specific server, that'll know what servers are at CCSF. So you might have to do 4 queries to find something. You query the root to find out where .edu is. You query .edu to find out who is the authoritative server for CCSF.edu. And then you ask that where the particular machine you're trying to reach at CCSF.edu is. This is the hierarchical system. And at every stage, these machines have memory and they retain answers they've handed out recently. So most of the time, you never have to go very high. You try these, and these have the answers stored in their cache. They don't really have to talk to the root. And that's why if the root was to go down for a while, it wouldn't really matter because the data that it hands out would already be cached at these lower levels. It would only be when those caches expire, which would be usually after some days, that they would have to go back to the root. Now you can follow it with plus trace. This will show you the delegation path. And I just ran it here. Let me just run it live. This is a Mac I'm using. So it's got dig built into it. Windows doesn't have dig, although it might have it in PowerShell by now. I haven't tested it lately. It certainly would if you have Windows subsystem for Linux. But anyway, if I dig ccsf.edu, that will just find the address for ccsf.edu and show you, it tells you query 1, answer 1, authority 0. This tells you I sent 1 question, I got 1 answer, but it was not from an authoritative server. It's a server with a copy of the record, but it's not the master copy. Normally that's good enough because you trust the system of reproducing the data. So all I get is this 1 record, the A record, which is the IP version 4 address for City College. All right. Now, but if I add plus trace to that, then it's going to trace the entire process of determining that information. And this turns into a pretty big deal these days. And what happened is the first thing it did was go to the root of DNS. That's what this is. And here's the root servers. Here it found the names of the root servers for .NET here. And now, this is new. This wasn't true a couple of years ago when I made my previous version of those slides. It now has a resource record signature, which we're going to talk about a lot more later. This is DNSSEC. DNSSEC means not only do DNS servers have the information, they have cryptographic signatures, which can be used to verify that they really are a trustworthy source of that information. And that's nice, although most browsers don't enforce it yet. But City College is apparently now part of this game. We have a resource record signature here. Then it goes to the next level. You go to these EDU servers for, this is the EDU, this is the root, 13 records for the root. Here's the EDU top-level servers. You get those in their names and a signature. And then you get down to City College's DNS servers. And every domain is supposed to have at least 2. We have 4 of them. They're part of cnic.org, and one is nsf.tcsf.edu. So these are the name servers that have copies of the City College's domain names. And then you finally get the particular one I asked for, which is just ccsf.edu with no server name. And that's this particular IP address down here. So those are the 4 queries shown explicitly that you'll get if you do a dig with a plus trace turned on. All right. So that shows this process. And like I say, typically you don't really have to go very high before you find a server that has the information you need in a cache. Now, what has happened in the past, particularly in 2008, is they found ways to poison the cache of those servers. So if you have an intermediate server here, and people are using it, like there's a Comcast DNS server, and some Comcast student goes to this website, it will ask higher servers where it is and then save it in that server. And then when another person goes to that website, it won't ask anybody. It'll just look and say, oh, I looked that up recently. So until it expires from the cache, which is typically some hours, it will just keep showing everybody the copy of the information. And if you're able to forge a response and wait for it to ask a higher level server and then send it a false response to fool it, you could get a bad information in the cache, and then those servers, like the Comcast customers in that region, would all get the wrong address. And that's what's happened a few times. That's a cache poisoning effect. And something says, is that a form of checksum? You could look at it that way. It's more complicated than a checksum, but it does serve the purpose of these resource record signature records. They're more like HTTPS certificates. It's a cryptographic signature to prove that you really are getting this from the server you think is getting it to. And in order to prevent this caching attack, the caching attack involves tricking a server, by asking for a server that didn't exist, it would then ask higher levels, where is the address for that server, and you could then send responses. And before we had this DNSSEC signature, it didn't have any way to verify those responses really came from the server above it or not. So you could send it from somewhere else and fool it and poison the cache. This is why we have DNSSEC, to prevent people from being able to poison the cache. If they ask a server, they will not believe an answer unless it comes with a signature that only that server could send. So nobody else can send a fake response and fool it. It's a very good question. People are right on track. All right, that's cache poisoning. And there have been various examples of that. And the biggest one was Dan Kaminsky. Dan Kaminsky figured out how to poison the cache of any DNS server because he figured out how to do this without exploiting any weakness in the software, but just using the protocol as written. He was able to find an attack that could effectively poison any DNS server that obeyed the official rules of DNS. And that is the main motivation, really, for people to moving to DNSSEC, which adds those recess record signatures and makes this attack essentially impossible. And another kind of attack was DNS Changer. DNS Changer is this actually happens now and then. They infected machines, Windows machines, and then they changed their DNS server. So instead of pointing to your company's server or your ISP server like it normally would, it pointed to a criminal's server. And the criminals put up a DNS server that would most of the time give you the right answer, but would give you the wrong answer for something like a popular bank. So you'll be going to the right service, to the right normal web surfing, but when you go to your bank, it will send you to a fake bank website. It's a pretty clever attack. I say it infected like 4 million people, and they got at least 14 million in profit. They used fraudulent advertising. That's another kind of DNS attack where they poison your operating system. So let's try a Kahoot. I should have these ready to go. That is 41A. Here we go. All right. So if you haven't taken my classes before, may not have done this, it's just a quiz to sort of keep people awake, and there's extra credit if you're one of the top 3. Yes, it does use public and private key cryptography. Yeah. So go to kahoot.it and put in that number and a name, and you can play this game, and you'll accumulate some extra credit if you score highly. That's right. And as Joe Apple says, there is an app apparently you can put on your phone to play Kahoots too. I've never done it that way, but everything has to have an app these days, of course. Which, by the way, is completely bogus. I don't know why we don't just use the browser on our phone to do everything. I'm afraid Caitlin's analysis is correct that the only reason everybody has an app is so they can track you and sell the data to make money. But for some ungodly reason, we have a separate app for every company instead of just having a website, a web browser like this, and use the browser to reach every company. There is no good reason for that. I can think just some bad reasons. Therefore, every app has a whole browser built into it for no reason at all. It's extremely wasteful and pointless, filling up your phone to memory with dozens of unnecessary copies of a browser. QR code takes you to the browser. Yep, well, yeah. I'll wait a few more seconds, see if anybody else is coming. All right. All right. So what would happen if your local DNS resolver went down for an hour? Yeah, the whole internet would be unavailable. If you don't have working DNS, you could only go to websites if you knew the IP address, and that would be like knowing somebody's phone number. I don't think anybody knows phone numbers anymore. I just have a contacts list, same kind of thing. Basically, none of your software would work unless it actually ran locally and didn't have a web component, which is not much these days. All right, what attack made Dan Kaminsky famous? Was a very famous guy because of this one attack. He did a lot of other things, but this was the one that really was earth-shaking, made him world famous. That was, he figured out how to poison DNS caches. That was the famous Kaminsky attack. He was a great guy, very brilliant, very nice, but he died a few years ago, so we miss him. He was a great guy. But anyway, this was what he's going to be remembered for, the DNS attack. All right, how many servers will be queried by that command? Usually just one. You will ask your router, and your router will ask one server, and usually the first place you go has it, and you don't have to go any further. It'll be in its cache. You don't really know, but typically it's one server to solve and do normal DNS resolution for a normal website that exists. It's found in the cache because somebody else has gone to it recently. Like if you're a Comcast customer, you ask your Comcast server, and that Comcast server is being used by thousands of people, and somebody else probably went to that website recently, so it's probably just got a copy of that record in its memory. All right, so how many root servers are there? Yep, 13. They call it 13 servers, although it's really 13 geographically dispersed server clusters. The reason they only have 13 domain names is because originally DNS was limited to 512 bytes of response, and you can only fit 13 addresses in that. So that's the number of amount of information you can get in one response. That's no longer true, as you can see. Now that you have those big signatures, so we're getting more than that. But that was how it originally was limited to this number 13. Yeah. All right, so how many servers will be queried by this? Dig, CCSDU plus trace. That's 4 of them. All 4 of them to get to the root. You dig dot, then you dig .edu, then you dig ccsf.edu, and then a 4th one to get to the end. So, all right. What would you notice if the root DNS servers went down for an hour? It'd have no effect. You just work with the cached information at a lower level. A brief outage would have no significant effect on anybody. Would just mean that a few records that expired wouldn't be updated, and you'd have to go to some other server to get them, but certainly for an hour you'd probably find everything you need to carry on business as usual. All right, what port does DNS use? TCP and UDP. Port 53 for DNS. Been that way from the start of the service with real old RFC. All right. A Net Plus question. And what protocol does it use normally? That's UDP. Normally it's done over UDP, sometimes TCP in more modern cases, but mostly UDP. All right. All right. That looks like a real name. That's good. I know who that is. And good, that's a real name too. Good. Good. Sometimes people use fake names and they're at risk of not getting their points. But this time I think we'll have no trouble figuring out who you people are. All right. So let's talk about attacks involving DNS. Now, one is when DNS assists attacks. Now, the WannaCry ransomware was ransomware that would infect machines, pop up a box, and make them stop working, and it caused hospitals across England to shut down and have to divert patients, probably costing some lives. And this was because of attacks developed by the NSA, which they then lost control of and leaked and let the Russians steal them, and the Russians sent it off to develop this malware and spread it around the world. It was a great embarrassment for the NSA. Microsoft had released a patch, so the NSA had apparently secretly informed Microsoft in advance, but hospitals didn't all install it on time, so a lot of people had hospitals going down. But it turned out that a researcher called Malware Check is his handle, analyzed the malware. He got a copy of the malware and he looked in there and he just ran something like strings on it and found that it had a domain name in there. So and the domain name was not bought. So he bought the domain name. And it turned out, he didn't know this, but it turned out that buying that domain name turned off the worm, so it saved America. He hit Britain first. He was in Britain. He bought the domain name. The attack was neutralized before the time zones came to where the hospitals opened for normal business in America, and they didn't go down. So he was a hero, so they invited him to DEF CON to give a talk. He came and gave the talk and then was immediately arrested by the FBI for earlier banking attacks he'd done in the past. Yeah, Marcus Hutchins, he's still in America. He was trapped in America for years, going to court, but the EFF helped him, and I think he didn't go to jail or anything, but he spent years fighting it in court, and ended up, now he lives in America. And he's very popular on Mastodon, and he's making a living as a sort of cybersecurity celebrity. So, makes a lot of videos, and a lot of blog posts and stuff. She is his technical guru of sort, and nobody thinks he's a criminal anymore, but like a lot of hackers in his early days, he did some unethical things with banking malware. So anyway, all right. So dynamic DNS is a system that allows you to host servers on temporary addresses. So if you have a home internet connection and your IP address changes frequently, which is really not that common anymore, then you can have a system where traffic is rerouted through a dynamic DNS server to find your machine wherever it is and let it run as a server. That was the idea. But now it's abused by botnet operators and phishers and malware download sites that change addresses rapidly to avoid getting blocked and shut down. There are blacklists of bad DNS addresses that are known to be hosting malware, and people add them to their router configurations and firewalls and such to block that traffic. So if you put up a site doing bad things, you have to keep moving it around to dodge those deny lists. And fast flux DNS is another way to do it. You can use DNS records that have a very short expiration time, so they can be refreshed very often, and you keep moving the DNS address around, moving the IP address around. So again, it just makes it hard for anybody to block the traffic or to find it to take it down. Then there's packet amplification attacks, which someone already asked about. The original one was the Smurf attack. You would send a ping address on the internet to a broadcast address. So you could ping a broadcast address at, say, City College. It would then go through the internet, hit thousands of machines at City College. They would all reply, and that large number of replies would come back to the attacker. But since ping does not have a TCP handshake, it's not over TCP protocol, you can put a fake from address in it, and the response will go to a different place than the actual source. So an attacker could send one ping request, and then you get thousands of ping responses going to the target. So it's packet amplification. And that was the first famous packet amplification attack. Because of that, they modified the ping protocol so you no longer can ping a remote site's broadcast address. You can only do it locally on your own network. You can't send a request over the internet to somebody else's block of IP addresses. But you can do essentially the same thing with DNS. You find a domain name where a small request gives you a large response, and it runs over UDP, so there is no handshake. So again, you can forge the destination address and you can get some amplification this way. And in fact, it's pretty effective because of these big resource records. These big signatures add a lot of data to this, so I just tried it earlier, right before class. I was updating these slides to reflect the fact that City College now has signed records, which it didn't used to. And when you catch them in Wireshark, you'll see a request of 70 bytes gives a response of 567 bytes. Then this one of 79 gives a response of 1209. So this is an issue that's well known. DNSSEC has the side effect of making packet amplification attacks more powerful. So as you can see, even just the first one here, which is not the biggest one, has amplification of about 8 times. This one's even bigger. So it's absolutely true that you can multiply your attack by a lot by using UDP-based DNS, and it's in the design. It's not exactly it's a feature. It's not like a bug they can fix, really. It's a problem. And in fact, one thing I wanted to do, since the question came up, I didn't. Let me run Wireshark and do this again, because I'm not sure if it's UDP or TCP anymore. Let's take a look. Oh, I must have. Okay, get rid of this. I'm pretty sure it's UDP. So if I start sniffing, I get all kinds of traffic. If I filter for DNS, I'm fine. Now I bring back my terminal, which is back here somewhere. All right, and I run this DNS ccsf.edu. Okay, and there it is. So I'll stop it, and it is UDP. There it is. So this is typical UDP stuff, and that's the game. And so I guess it's using eDNS because here it is sending more than 512 bytes in response. Anyway, so it's UDP. Therefore, it can be spoofed in this fashion because UDP doesn't have any handshake. It has no way to know whether the return address is genuine. All right. So this is what I imagine my Mac must be using, is eDNS, to let you send larger packets over UDP. UDP can carry a lot of traffic. Just for some reason, the original DNS specification said you only send 512 bytes. All right. Then you can have DNS as the conduit of attacks. There are communication protocols that send fake DNS packets to control them. This is when you have machines infected with botnet software, they have to phone home. And in the early days, they would phone home using IRC, but that's, people just block that at the firewall. That was pretty obvious. It used funny port numbers. So it's more clever is to send DNS or HTTP requests that include encrypted data in the names of servers. So you can send data out, sneak data out through a network, and it will be passed through the firewalls and such because it looks like HTTP or UDP traffic. So another thing, and because they're doing that, you can watch for that malicious traffic by monitoring your DNS. Infected machines often make a lot of DNS queries, and spam relays make DNS requests to find the address of mail servers and so on. So by monitoring the DNS traffic, you can detect often when machines are infected. The configure worm, for example, infected Windows machines, and it would then make 50,000 new domains per day with these names, and they were predictable. So they tried to take over the configure domain by buying all these names or blocking them all as they were being generated by the pseudo-random name generator in the domain. And here, for example, is number of requests per hour of normal traffic, and bots make a lot more traffic of DNS. This is indication that the bots are sending secret information out, concealing it in DNS packets. So you can block DNS resolution for malicious domains, and one service that does that is OpenDNS, now part of Cisco. I think it's now called Cisco Umbrella, this product, where you just use them for your DNS server, and then if any traffic is sent to a no malicious site, they will block it. So it gives you a layer of security on your network, which is nice. That's OpenDNS, gives you any cache reliability and blocks malicious servers, and if you pay, you can turn on other things like monitoring your users and having parental controls and recording what they do and things like that. Then the Stormworm had a command and control center to use fast flux DNS, so it would mutate this one every 30 minutes. It can go much faster, but anyway, it keeps changing the address, make it hard to block. And Microsoft took over a domain. This is a controversial process, so it's becoming quite common that a company trying to fight attacks will take over domains. and they take over the command and control servers, and then they take over control of the botnet. And they can use it to perhaps clean off the botnet or pop up a warning message to the users or things like that. All right. And another issue is the privacy implications of DNS, which is if you just monitor DNS, you'll see that all these packets are sent in plain text every time. So every time you type a URL in your browser, it sends a request to resolve it, and that typically goes by unencrypted UDP. So on your local network, there's an unencrypted packet telling everybody every domain you went to. So monitoring this is extremely helpful for your security team. Many people are very addicted to this. If you block external DNS servers on your firewall and force everybody to use your official company DNS server and then just record the traffic coming into it, it tells you what everybody's doing. So if somebody gets infected with malware, if they go to a forbidden site like a porn site or a game that you don't want to go into, you have a complete record, easy, of who went there, what time they did it. So it's quite valuable, but it's a privacy risk to the same regard. So that's why, since they're not encrypted and they don't have any strong authentication, people can send fake responses and alter and poison your local cache on your local machine. This is one of the things people often do, is to send spoof DNS responses to intercept traffic on shared wireless networks. So, all right. So here's the cost of DNS attacks. If somebody manages to take your DNS server out, then of course people can't reach your website for a while, and that would cause you to lose revenue if the website is an integral part of your business. And then of course a modified DNS service can do lots of things. Send people to phishing sites, send people to malware download sites, and so on. And we've got cyber war going on, of course we have for years. Estonia in particular uses a lot of internet voting, and there's a whole lot of attacks of all kinds being used by nation states all over the place in attacking DNS and many other protocols. So anyway, that gets you off to a start here. Let's do another Kahoot, and then I'll talk about the first set of projects. So we are 41B. Here we go. Right. All right. Wait a few more seconds. All right. All right, so what technique makes it possible to link a DNS name to a portable device that moves around? That's dynamic DNS. All right. All right, what technique makes packet floods stronger? All right, distributed reflected denial of service. That's what it is, packet amplification. Very good. What technology allows larger DNS over UDP? All right, that's extended DNS, which I'm pretty sure is what I'm using right here on this Mac. All right, so what measure blocks access to malicious servers? OpenDNS is what does that. The firewall doesn't. It's not that smart. But OpenDNS does. All right. There's a thing called Smart Screen in Windows that tries to do the same thing through a Microsoft service. All right. What portion of DNS traffic is encrypted? None of it. None of the traffic anywhere is encrypted. Right now, there is a protocol called DNS over HTTPS that some browsers use under some conditions, but it's very rare. Right now, almost all DNS traffic is unencrypted all the way up the chain. It is, however, signed with those resource record signatures in most cases now. All right, what can you detect by monitoring DNS packets? You get the domain names. When they first go to a domain like ccsf.edu, you'll see that, but then as they click links and surf around on the website, you won't see any more DNS traffic from that. So you don't know everything they're doing, but you know what domains they're using. So you get a general idea of what they're doing. All right. All right, that's a 2-time winner on IL. Good. And Tark 2. Yeah. And well, the same people both times. I've had people complain the same people keep winning the Kahoots, but anyway, they're doing good work. All right. So I'm going to stop this recording. If I can get to the recording stuff, which is here.